So we all know that lots of money is spent every year. Billions of dollars are spent every year on tools, technology, and training for the sales force. And this is for a very specific reason, right? We are spending this money in order to get more salespeople to quota, improve our win rates, and generate more revenue. And the hope is that we'll get better ROI, but we don't. We've got these disappointing results from investment after investment. And this cycle just continues. And in fact, one of the most recent statistics is that 40% of sellers are not meeting quota. And this number, this percentage of sellers at quota has been in decline for 6 years running. And we don't seem to see any real light at the end of this tunnel. So lots of investment, very meager results. And what to do about this? What do we do about this cycle of investment and disappointing results? Well, we would say that there's some really good information to be had if you really do your due diligence. So what I'm going to share with you today are seven separate studies that we've conducted over an 8-year period with 27 global sales organizations, over 10,000 salespeople, and over 1,600 sales managers. Now, I'm not going to share the individual results of each of these studies because it would take much more time than we have right now, but I'm going to be referring back to these studies as we navigate our session today. So let's just suffice it to say that we've done our homework at VantagePoint. So what we found, one of the overarching themes of these series of research studies is that there are two faulty assumptions that are alive and well in today's sales force, particularly in the minds of sales leaders and sales enablement leaders. So one of the assumptions is that my sales managers are the least of my worries. They've got this. And the other one is that if we could only standardize on a single methodology and get everybody to be, utilizing that methodology, things would improve. All would be good. And we know this isn't happening because sales teams are struggling. In our study of our multiple studies of sales managers over a 4-year period, 75% of the managers in our study were failing to hit their revenue targets. They were failing to get even half of their teams to quota. The revenue gap between the bottom 25 and the top 25% of managers in our study was a whopping 39%, which equates to about $33.5 million shortfall per manager. And that's pretty staggering, right? So not only do our sales managers not have it covered, what we're finding is there's this frontline void where you have this role that could be a real force multiplier, but is being under-leveraged and bombarded, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in a few minutes. We also know that 40% of sellers are not meeting quota, so the sales methodology isn't working. We know that there are a couple of key levers that can have a dramatically positive impact on sales performance: sales coaching and sales execution. The challenge is, how do you pull these levers in a way that actually generates the results you want instead of continually creating disappointing outcomes? And we're going to start this discussion with sales coaching. In order to really understand why sales managers are failing, it's useful to consider the real life environment that they live in and day out, not some ideal environment that people would like for you to believe exists, but the real environment. So you have a sales manager, probably been promoted from being a very successful sales rep. They're excited about the job, excited about working with their team, and boom, all these pressures hit. You've got marketing who wants you to, follow up on their campaign, sell certain products over others. You've got customers who need support, who have complaints, who have issues. You have your sales reps, not the least of which is your sales reps, who need help selling, they need help with proposals. They might even need some coaching now and then. You've got your sales leader riding herd on the sales manager for the forecast. When are you going to bring in that big deal? You've got HR deploying competency models, saying, please assess your people against this competency model and put together a development plan. And then, of course, you have sales ops who needs information for reporting, and they want their pound of flesh. As if that weren't enough, we then can pile on your CRM system, a new dashboard that perhaps your organization has come up with, throw in some general leadership and coaching training for good measure. And if that weren't enough, then we then have multiple sales methodologies with associated tools. And you have this person who's super excited about their job and then becoming overwhelmed, and this is what you end up with. And this is the reality that your sales managers are facing. And it's the reason that they're not doing as well of a job as they'd like to at getting more of their people to quota. So what do you do about this? This is where research really matters. And we would consider, and we've been told by many of our clients and others in the field, that we've done more significant research into sales management really than any sales enablement organization out there. And what we do is we look at what sales managers really do in the real world, and we codify what works and what doesn't, and what are high performers doing differently in order to eliminate that frontline void. So we're going to start with one of our research studies as it relates to sales coaching. One of our studies we looked at the academic literature, we looked in the enablement space to find out, what are the sort of 800-pound gorillas as it relates to sales coaching. And there really are three predominant types in all of the literature that we were able to glean. The first type is called capability coaching. And this is where managers work to develop seller skills and knowledge, which, sounds pretty familiar, right? You then have outcome coaching, which is really about assessing a seller against target results. And finally, activity coaching, which is really about influencing seller actions and behaviors. And so we took a look at the degree to which managers in our research were deploying these different types of coaching and whether sellers were receiving them. And we looked at then what is the relationship between these different types of coaching and quota attainment. And I'm pretty sure you're going to be shocked by the results. We were shocked. So capability coaching only represented about a 2% variation in quota attainment. It didn't even come close to reaching statistical significance. Outcome coaching, a little more powerful, still did not reach statistical significance. The only type of coaching that reached statistical significance and really mattered the most was activity coaching. And here's what's interesting. We looked at objective sales performance, but we also looked at self-ratings of sales performance. When we did the analysis using self-ratings, every type of coaching was strongly related to quota attainment. It was only when we looked at objective data, objective sales performance, that the picture became much more clear. And that's what matters anyway. If people think they're making quota, it doesn't matter. It matters that they do make quota. So how do these different types of coaching manifest in the organizations that we work with? Well, most competency models and generic leadership models are really aimed at capability coaching, identifying different competencies, looking to close those competencies. Outcome coaching typically manifests as forecasting, pipeline management, pipeline scrubbing. And activity coaching is really all about the lifeblood of what sellers do day in and day out to basically sell more stuff. We're making calls, pursuing opportunities, managing accounts, mining territories. And here's what's the scary part about this news we have here, this message. The types of coaching that are the least effective by far tend to be the ones that are formally mandated, right? Organizations require managers to assess their people against competency models. We're required to go through, generic leadership training. We have to put together a forecast. We have to manage our pipeline. Sales leaders will not leave that, up to discretion. However, activity coaching, the most powerful coaching, is almost always left up to the manager's discretion. So we've got this disconnect between the kind of coaching that really moves the needle and the degree to which that coaching is formalized within organizations. So here we are with a result that's pretty shocking, but interesting, in that activity coaching matters, and it matters a lot. In fact, managers who orient toward more activity coaching are much more likely to get a higher percentage of their sellers at quota. Strong, positive relationship between activity coaching and quota attainment. So we know activities are sort of the secret sauce. But the next question is, which activity should you coach? Well, it depends. Coaching is not a one-size-fits-all affair. So which activity should you coach? Well, that depends on which business results you're targeting. Are you looking to increase market share? Are you looking to derive higher revenues? you got to really kind of codify what is that result you're targeting, and then tie that to very specific sales objectives, which are necessary to achieving those results. Which customers do you want to target? Which kind of customer mix do you want? What kind of product mix do you want? And once you've identified the objectives, whether that's new customer acquisition, whether that's account expansion, whether that's upselling, cross-selling, then we have to identify which sales activities must be executed consistently well in order to achieve these objectives and ultimately these sales results. Again, no one size fits all as it relates to coaching. So activity coaching matters. Which activities to coach? Well, that depends on what your results are that you're trying to achieve. But the next obvious question is, well, how and when should you coach? And again, it depends. Well, what does it depend on? Well, once you've selected those activities that you consider the most high impact, it could be prospecting, it could be early stage deal qualification, it could be joint account planning with your largest clients. Whatever those highest impact activities are, those managers that outperform related to their peers then structure those coaching conversations in a way that drives maximum impact. They have preparation inputs from themselves and their sellers. They have outputs that are documented and followed up on, and they have agendas to make sure that those conversations are effective and meaningful. And they also determine the right rhythm. How often should they be having these coaching conversations? And for different types of conversations, we have different rhythms. Some might be weekly, some might be quarterly, and different durations. So what we find is the managers that are the most successful, that have the highest performance and get the most of their sellers to quota, don't coach more. They don't even coach more frequently. They coach differently. They prioritize their coaching around those activities that matter most. They structure those coaching conversations to dive deep into the meat of the coaching conversations. And they do it with sort of what we would call the minimum level of rigor, meaning if once every 2 weeks is enough, don't do it every week, right? Which makes these rhythms more executable over time. So how do you know if it's working? How do you know if your coaching is working? Well, if you've identified the activities that are the most high impact and you've oriented them and structured them within a rhythm, the right rhythm of coaching conversations, then you should see movement in the sales objectives and ultimately the sales results. So it's basically a closed loop management framework that the highest performers are executing in order to drive better results. So improving sales coaching through utilizing these behaviors and frameworks that we discovered through our research result in better sales management and better coaching. Managers who implement this approach get 30% more of their sellers to quota compared with their less effective peers. And they also drive 39% more revenue, eliminating and closing that frontline void.